CloudDB, shaping your new normal.
Welcome everyone to the 2021 APAC Groundbreakers Virtual Tour by Oracle UC. This year our event will be the biggest one ever done with 144 sessions, including normal sessions, workshops, and hands-on labs from 100 different speakers over 17 days. Also, it will cover sessions in 4 different languages. Please remember to register to as many sessions as you can. As more sessions you are registered, more sessions you can also watch the replays. I would like to say thanks to all Oracle user groups and Java user groups that made this event possible, and also to our sponsors, Oracle Groundbreakers, and your main sponsor, CloudDB. Now for today's session, top 5 tips for modern UI design by Peter Koletzke. Please feel free to write questions at any time during this session by using the chat tab of the live webinar, and the speaker will be answering all your questions by the end of the session. If there is any issues during the presentation, please feel free to contact me at any time by using the same chat tab on live webinar in your right bottom corner of your screen. Now, without any more delays, I would like to leave you with this amazing session by Peter Koletzke. Peter, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Francisco. Great introduction. So I put this session together after I've done a bunch of research to figure out what modern UI design is, now that we've got all of these mobile devices out here. It's different now, and so I kind of collected all of the information that I received from my research into this presentation. So first of all, I asked myself, I was looking at apps on my phone and all the mobile devices around, and I thought, we started with very different types of screens. So, how do we actually get to the point that we're at now? How has user interface design changed over the years? And I'm going to skip a couple of slides here. These are basically screenshots of different Oracle tools. And I did a chart that shows the display device or paradigm, the Oracle development tool, whether graphics is supported or not, the capability or the feature for data input, the way navigation is done around the screens, how much end user training is required, and then the display software, what's used for that. And I put all this together just based on 5 or 6 different trends that I identified through the years, starting with character mode through client server and Java, running Java applet in a browser. This was the method for Form 6i and 12 up to 12.2. And then light client, which meant that you've got user interactivity and screens are more interactive, basically, with the user. Light client, and then into the mobile devices. And I looked at this chart and I thought it's hard to tell trends using this. So this is not something that we would see in a mobile device to get some quick and easy trend information. So I said, this is not mobile aware. So I put this slide up. So I said, let's try to do a graph and track these things, over time, and time being the different paradigms for both the Oracle tools, which you see in gray at the bottom, and also the technologies that were used for those user interfaces. And I have these very scientific measurements, like, on the left side, this is how much of whatever parameter we're going to look at is there. So we go from none to a bit to some to more to a lot. So there's very scientific measurements. And then over time, and again, there's no actual, number of years or whatever. And these technologies obviously overlapped, right? We had, and we still do have mainframe dumb terminal modes, and there's probably still client server out there. So I looked at the key presses, for example, for one of the parameters, and there was basically the only way that you interacted with the mainframe was with key presses in those days. And then the use of key presses minimized when we got into the graphical user interfaces, and then it's even less now with mobile devices. The next parameter was end user training. When we had mainframes and dumb terminals and those kind of character mode forms, there was quite a bit of user training needed. In fact, I remember books, the Oracle developer product books included a user guide, which was basically how you actually operate as a end user operator, without even touching on the programming part. So, and then end user training went down, and now we're basically expecting no training required for mobile and smart devices. Mouse, of course, was just for client server and then through the web type technologies, and it wasn't there obviously with character mode, and it's not really there with smart devices, mobile. Graphics obviously increased over time, and now on mobile we're focusing a lot on graphics. So the trend on that one is basically up. And then the last one I put in was talks, or tap, swipe, and talk. Now talk, of course, if you have disability compliances, you would have talk throughout all these technologies, but talk is a main type of input capability, or a main type of input feature for the mobile devices, and tap and swipe are fairly unique, although there were touch screens throughout some of the graphical technologies as well. So looking at this, it's a little bit easier than looking at that table with all the different words in it. And what we can get from this is the main changes that happened, basically the deltas, right? So the biggest one is last, but we did have a large one here between character mode and client server, because we introduced the idea of graphics, which meant there's less user training required, and we had the mouse and graphics. And another big change happened when we went from light client, which was basically the Java, non-Java, running in a browser, high interactivity, to the Web 2 or Ajax, which was very interactive. Screens looked kind of like they did in client server. So that was quite a change. But the biggest change that we have, most of the changes in these different parameters happened before we had the mobile interfaces coming into play. So that is kind of a synopsis of why it's so different now, because user interface design is very different because there's so much changed. So foundation is really that the number of mobile devices exceeds the world population, and this has been true now for probably 3-4 years. Business users have great expectations for business applications because they've been using mobile applications, for example, cell phone, and they don't really have any tolerance for training. There was a study done where there's a 3-second user acceptance time. Basically, a user looks at an app and says, they try it out for 3 seconds, and if it doesn't work, they go on to the next app that does a similar thing. And basically, you have 3 seconds to have your user accept your application. Short attention span is another thing. So short tasks is more important now. Touch interface is something new, and orientation changes is something that we didn't really have with the previous technologies. So all of this impacts the application design. The main challenge is that we have display size differences. And this is a white paper that was done by James Lentz, who is an IBM guy, 10 years ago. I would highly recommend a read through on this. I have the link at the bottom, but the name of it is User Interface Design for the Mobile Web. So 10 years ago, he was talking about how display size differences are so varied that you have to design for basically any type of technology and any type of size. Now, this is a redraw of a chart that he put in his paper, and at the time these were the sizes of the different types of devices, but of course that's different now. But the idea is that there was a lot of variations in size and even format, right? So you have different aspect ratios in some of these as well. And then you add to this that the orientation can shift from portrait to landscape. And I have a little mock-up demonstration of that. This is Amazon.com on a phone. looking in, you would call this landscape mode. And then when you turn the phone, if the user interface components didn't redraw, everything would look really, really small, and you wouldn't be able to deal with it. Now, Amazon doesn't do that. Of course, this is just a demonstration of what could happen if you don't take the devices into account. So as I was going through research, I found basically 20 principles that you had to follow. And I kept reading, and then I found that there were actually 10, and actually the 10 principles were collections basically of the 20 principles. So I thought, okay, well, that's a little bit easier to understand and kind of grasp. And then I thought, well, I kept looking, and then I found another one where there were 5. I boiled it down basically from the 10 to the 5 basic principles for designing in the mobile world. And these are all for your business applications because the users expect that. So that's what we're going to go through today, wherever it is in your time in the world. It's night for me. So top five tips I collected. The first one is design for mobile first. And this is the one that was a common theme for all sources that I looked at. And in fact, most of them actually worded it this way, design for mobile first. So we'll look at that. The next one is visual, not textual. And this is something that I got from Oracle, that particular phrase. Simple navigation is the next one. Leverage the standards and use modern components. So these are the 5 that I've collected, and we'll go through descriptions, and I'll show little demonstrations of each of these as well. So design for mobile first. That's the first one. So when you're designing for your business application, you basically think that you basically keep in mind that you'll be designing for the display on a mobile device. So you can use, it may be actually that you do not deploy to a platform where a mobile device is possible, but you're still keeping this in mind, that mobile might be there. And that'll kind of modify how you think about things. And if you are actually supporting mobile devices, so your application will be run on a mobile device, then you have gesture and orientation awareness that you have to build in or accommodate somehow. And width aware, which means basically the orientation changes, the width changes. So there's this idea of responsive design. When the width changes or the orientation changes, then the screen redraws itself to show the important items in the top, or in view of whatever you're looking at. So automatic resizing and folding is another thing. So when you have boxes lined up, in a row and on top of one another, folding means when you change the orientation, those boxes reassemble themselves in order. Satisfying user expectations, of course, is important because the users are expecting your application to look like a mobile app, which is sometimes difficult in the technology that you have to use for your development. If you do have a mobile-only application, then you can incorporate the services on the device, like the camera, the GPS, the contacts, accelerometer, wild things that are included with the phone, which you wouldn't be able to do if you're supporting both mobile and desktop. But if it's only mobile, then you have additional features that you could tap into. Adding social features these days is important for collaboration, instant messaging. These are things that users are kind of interested in and also accustomed to. Some more tips. So use design patterns. There are patterns that you can use that have been published. Oracle Alta UI is one of them, and I'll show you and talk about that a little bit later in the 5th section or 4th section. So there's skins, icons, and colors that they've figured out that you can use that are beneficial and actually have passed user acceptance testing. Testing on the narrowest width device. This is something that we've kept in mind throughout the years. After character mode, which was always whatever 80 by 25 or whatever it was, we had to deal with screen resolution, Was it 600 by 800, 800 by 600 or 640 by 480 or 1200 by whatever? So we would figure out what the users had as their smallest device, and then design accommodating that device. So we have to test also on multiple devices and multiple widths to see that the screens react correctly and everything's readable. So tiles moving with the width change, that's something that I mentioned, and we'll look at that in a demo. Containers and contents resizing automatically, and no horizontal scrolling. No horizontal scrolling is another thing that we've been using for many years too, as a design pattern / standard. It's easier to scroll vertically than it is to scroll horizontally, or horizontally and vertically. Horizontal scrolling is something to avoid. Oh, so demo one. All right. So I'm going to show you. This is a sample application. Let me bounce over to this. Okay. So this is a sample application that Oracle's created in Jet, which is the JavaScript extension toolkit that they support and build. And it's a work better application. It's basically representing the Oracle demonstration, the demo tables, which are employee and department, those tables, in a graphical way. So we start with a dashboard, which would be, for the president. President is Stephen King. This is what he looks like. We've always wondered what he looks like. That's what he looks like. And he hasn't changed appearances in the 40, 50 years that Oracle's been around. But the idea with this is that you can see how the design principles are worked in. What I'm going to do is change the width of the screen. I'll narrow the width, which will emulate how it would look on a narrower device, or changing from landscape to portrait. And notice that the boxes reshaped or reoriented themselves. And again, as I keep moving, so the first box that appeared on the screen in the upper left corner always appears at the top, regardless of how narrow you make this. And you can get down even farther if it's a really small device, and it kind of abbreviates some of the boxes, but it still shows the main content, and it's still all there. So this is one of the responsive design demonstrations. So okay, that's kind of the folding, and the boxes moving around is also called folding. The other thing that's demonstrated here is that we're using colors in a particular palette, and fairly bold colors, and we'll talk about that in the next one as well. And again, no horizontal scrolling, it's only vertical scrolling. So I think that is enough for principle one, which is mobile first. Second principle is visual, not textual. So the idea is to use simple design elements, which are flat. There's very few lines. There's little chrome. I remember trying to build a tab interface in Oracle Forms at one point, and it required a large number of graphics to create the curved corners. And then when you change from one tab to another, you have to change colors on the tabs and make one basically disabled and the other one enabled. So there was a lot going on. So the idea with this is that we avoid all of those, because it's extra graphics, it's extra bandwidth to render them. We call it little chrome. Chrome being kind of the graduated colors and curved lines and rounded corners, things like that. So the example that I show at the bottom would be how we would do buttons for submit and cancel, as opposed to something with gradated color and curved corners, which is kind of the way this would look in web and client server, any of the earlier type technologies. Some other principles, visual not textual, you want to make it easy to read. So emphasizing the top important content on the top and left, or however you're reading it, and then using saturated colors in case you're competing with ambient light. Using colors to highlight important data. It could be that different numbers are different colors. That can create an easier to read, an easier to understand interface. Big icons and buttons, large fonts, again, because you're displaying on different size devices. Using icons, not prompts, and I'll show you an example of that in the demo. And using graphs, but you can overuse graphs, so you have to be sure that there's not too many graphs. It's helpful to have a visual rendering of your data, but if you do too much of that, then it's hard to read. Okay, so we'll look at that. And back to the sample. So again, this application shows the important data at the top, which is the organization and you know, about me. So it has whatever details that this person needs to see on the dashboard kind of at the top. So the rest of it, you're looking at summaries of data and visual graphs, obviously, that show data. And for example, this one, the attrition history, you see the bubbles appear when I hover the mouse. This is something that we've used. This is not new at all, but it follows the principles of having a simple display and then being able to see more detail by doing some other action like hovering the mouse. There is very little chrome. You know, you don't see any graduated colors or any, not too many rounded corners. These are a bit rounded, but they're not overly rounded. And bold colors, large fonts, and this my org activities chart here shows different numbers with different colors. So if you see like a light blue like this, then that means it's greater than a darker blue. Users can get used to that kind of thing. And then at the bottom, my activities, you see the numbers represented in bubbles, but there's icons that show what they represent. So tasks, you would come to understand that that is actually this clock image, and appointments would be that calendar image. We can also look at the People tab, and you see another display, another way to see details about a person. And you can drill into one of these people, one of these persons. Oh, and this is an example. You see the icons for telephone, well, basically, I guess that would be landline type thing, mobile, email address, you know, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. And these are completely recognizable icons. You know, it's pretty much obvious to most users, and it should be obvious to most users that that's what these represent. And you could always have a mouse hover to explain them if you needed. But the idea is that we're not showing a prompt. If this was the character mode days, we'd have to have a field prompt that said landline number, mobile number, email address, Twitter, you know, handle, Facebook name, LinkedIn, you know, address, whatever. So instead of doing that, we have the icons, and it basically clears the screen out, which makes it easier to read. And the icons identify what the data is about. Okay, oh, saturated colors. That was the other comment here. The colors are, I mean, we see some lighter colors, but in general, it's a very bold look. You know, it would work well in ambient light if there's a lot of light around. So that's pretty much what we have to look at there. The next one for design tips is the idea of simple navigation. So making it easy to return to the opening page using breadcrumbs or content links, and also dividing the work into small tasks, which will solve the short attention span problem. Thinking about, the typical example is you're walking from your grocery store to your car in a parking lot, and you have to be able to complete the task in that amount of time. I mean, hopefully you won't get run over. And then summarizing the essential data and then being able to drill down. So that was kind of the idea with that one graph that I showed, which is the circle graph with the mouse hover. Some other principles for navigation, shallow menus. So if you have a pull-down menu, it's very difficult to navigate more than 2 levels because you sometimes lose the context and then you have to start over. So 2 levels would be a goal maximum. And navigate using design elements. And I'll show that again in the demo. And then alternative views for the same data, which I'll also show. And then using data entry using lists instead of having the user type in information. And this is good for data validation too. If there's a list, then it's an allowed value that the user has to pick and you don't have to do much validation on it. So we're going to look at that in the demo again. So simple navigation being for design elements rather, if you click anywhere in this box, it drills into people. So basically you were clicking on an image of a group of people and it navigates to the people page. And the same thing with this, if you click on the About Me person, then it drills into the profile, the details of that person. And you can see, different information using these info tiles. So if we look at About, then this is, it's got the cloud graph here and different information like the address and hire date. And then you can look at Performance tab or info tile. And did you notice how that is a little, I don't know if it's able to see, I'm navigating off of it and I'm navigating back, I'll navigate back to it and see if you can notice that it actually animates. I don't know if it'll actually render on this. No, it doesn't. Okay, but the boxes grow and this line also does as it's being displayed. So that's just a piece of the part of the component that is a feature, not really so much about navigation. It's more just a kind of a glitzy thing. And then compensation. So the idea is that we're clicking on the main tabs to get more information. So the team is here and navigation is through design elements, not necessarily, well, definitely not key presses and definitely not a menu. The only real menu is this area at the top, which is the dashboard, people, and organization. That's not really much of a menu. And then there's obviously, or typically, something that pulls down that relates to the person who's logged in. So preferences, help, sign out, about. Those are things that you'd expect to see in that person's name. Okay, so you see the different views of the people. We can look at it actually as a card view like this, or as a list. So that's just showing all the employees in a list type format, and then drilling. You can drill into those by clicking. So that's another navigation, content providing navigation basically. And the card. Let's look at the card view. Clicking on an employee, again, same thing. So it doesn't matter how the list is displayed. Clicking on that person will show you the details about that person. And again, no horizontal scrolling. And then we have a search field as well here. So if you type in something, it auto completes and auto filters to the matches, and it matches on first or last name. It doesn't matter which name. So these are all first names, but it'll do last name as well. Yeah, so that's kind of a navigational thing. Search field like that is kind of a navigational thing because it allows you to get to someplace really quickly. And again, we're seeing icons to represent, the org team members and the email. Okay, so back to slides. Yeah, so if you have searches, it's going to be more accurate if you select criteria from a list, if possible. But otherwise, if you type something in, auto completion, as I showed in that last demo, is a good thing if you can arrange that. And then trying to get a single field to represent multiple fields, multiple data elements is good. You think like Google, make it voice enabled if possible. Okay, so standards is the next principle. These design tips are really not, atomic, right? They're more categories of tips. So leveraging the standards. There are standards. Oh, this is a screen, a client that is to rename nameless that I worked with in 1998, so a long time ago. And the graphics department came up with this as a goal for what we wanted to do in Forms 4.5. And basically, you can do this kind of thing with forms now pretty easily, but back in those days, no, definitely not. So there were some compromises that had to be made. And the point is that there wasn't a standard, right? We weren't dealing with a standard that we could fulfill. Another design that I got in another client that will remain nameless in that same year, different client, was somebody that had created this particular screen in Microsoft Access. So you can do this wood grain background and these funny fields. And again, this is not something that there was a standard for. It's just that person thought that looked good, but we ended up doing something that was a little more business-like. So back in those days, and even after that, we didn't really have any design standards. So people were trying to create these books, about design or what not to design, for web pages. And we just were kind of floating as far as design principles. So Oracle created, there were standards that people used and created for themselves, and obviously, corporate standards, but there was nothing that was kind of coordinated. So Oracle released the Alta UI principles at Oracle Open World Conference in 2014 for their cloud applications, which used to be called Fusion. It's part of Oracle's user experience or UX effort. And you can go to that homepage and look at it. And I'm going to bounce over to that now so we can look at some of the screens live. This is still out there available. So look for Oracle Alta UI. And there's different categories, and they've designed the screens here within their principles. So simple, bold colors, little chrome, clean and relatively big fonts. So the gallery is a really useful tool. This is where you can actually get design patterns for screen designs that they've worked out. For example, this is the top left one is the modal about page. So if you wanted to design an about page in your application, you could follow this principle. And if you click on it, you get a better view of it. So different types of screens, there's all sorts of different categories. The other useful thing here is the UI patterns, which is this area here. So you can look at either browser version or a mobile version. And the browser version, for example, the browser version lists some things that you need to think about in browsers. We're missing some stuff, and so it goes through page layout, page types, page attributes, basically principles that you want to pay attention to when you're designing for a browser. Now we're going to go back to Alta UI. It's not going. That will do it. Okay. There are some problems with the site. Demos. So the demo we've been looking at is the Work Better app. And if you click on this now, it won't go anywhere because this link has been broken for 4 or 5 years. But I'll show you in the slides how to get to it. Oh, this is a new error message, but it's at least an error message. The Fix It Fast app is another example that's written in JavaScript. So you can look at that as a demo. And then the tips, and a lot of these tips we've talked about. The style sheet for this page has also been broken for a while, but you can read through, the different categories, and it does talk about some of the things we've already talked about, like design for mobile first is here. Okay, back to homepage. And then the last piece of this is the visual. And this is just explaining more about graphics and visuals and, what you want to think about when you're doing these types of screens. And then there's more samples. You see more samples in the Alta UI gallery here and on the examples page. So this is really a good place to go because Oracle's already done a lot of research to figure out what is best from the standpoint of user acceptance and user design, mobile design. Okay, so yeah, demo 4, that was demo 4. So I'm going to bounce through a bunch of screens, which were basically everything that we just looked at. But they're all slides in case the demo didn't work. That's the way you do it. So the next thing is the Oracle UX site, which you can go to with that link, the Oracle UX. And it's Alta UI is part of UX. So you can read through, what they've figured out for design principles. And there are also rapid development kits that you can look at with some templates that you can use. So it's also useful to look at. Part of this too is Oracle Redwood. Redwood is the new look and feel for Oracle's website. You've probably seen, these colors and the way that it looks now is not all red and black like it used to be. And the idea with Redwood is that application flow is going to use machine learning and bots and unfolding. And this was introduced 2 years ago at Oracle Open World 2019. They said it's inspired by Asian, African, and Aboriginal art. And there's not a lot of detail out there yet. So I've included on the slide, which hopefully you'll be able to get to later, some links that explain what Redwood's all about. But we don't have any detail. We don't have as much detail as we have yet for Alta UI. Okay, so the last category of tips is using modern components. So modern components is the reason that this screen that we were looking at is able to reshape itself when the display width is narrowed. The components themselves detect what the width is in the screen, and they reshape themselves. And I was looking into that in HTML and CSS, and I found this property that's underlined, display flex, flex wrap, wrap. That is what makes this folding thing happen. So if you're doing that type of thing, the rest of all this code is really just so you can see the boxes and see different colors. But the key piece is that. So I think that's what's being used in most cases, CSS. The JavaScript example we looked at, and this is the way that you fix that link. You change jet to jet-620, and then you'll be able to see that demo that I just showed you. If you're using Apex or you're developing in Apex, then you use the universal theme, and that accommodates the Alta UI principles. And there's extensive documentation on this. This is very impressive documentation. apex.oracle.com/UT, universal theme. And Apex 20.1 aligns with that already. So if you're using 20.1, go out there and look at the patterns and components and everything they have to say about that. If you're using ADF, Shai Smeltzer, who I call Oracle Guru Extraordinaire, although he's a director of development, has blog entries and YouTube videos on this. So you can go out there and look at those if you're doing ADF. For Google resources, so there's a page on Google's website that talks about mobile design, and you just go to mobile, this one at the top, basically. And then they have a mobile friendliness site tester where you can put in your URL and they can show you, what it looks like in a mobile device. You can also try the Chrome browser mobile emulator. So you go to the menu in the upper right. I'm not going to show this because we're getting close to time, but the menu is, click on the menu, the little dots, more tools, developer tools, and then there's a toggle device toolbar in that screen that pops up for developer tools. And it will show you a screen where you can see an emulation of a mobile device, and you can actually change the mobile device. If you look carefully at the screen with the upper, close to the left side, it says Galaxy S5, and that's a pull down where you can select different types of mobile devices. And of course, these are the JavaScript stuff on the right. And then you can change the orientation with that little icon, so you can see it in landscape mode if you want to. So it's a quick way to see your screen, that whatever you're running in your browser in a mobile emulator. So most important tip is use modern components, because they will get you all this stuff. You don't have to develop it yourself, which is really good. So I always like to end with a quote. How the best way to go mobile. To be happy in this world, first you need a cell phone, then you need an airplane, then you're truly wireless. Ted Turner, Media Mogul. All right, so we're going to summarize, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Mobile apps have raised the bar for UI design. Users are expecting you to write your business applications so that they look like mobile device apps. So you have to keep 5 principles in mind, 5 tips. Design for mobile first, visual not textual, simple navigation, leverage the standards, and using modern components. All that will get you a great way towards the goal of making your app look like a mobile app. And then testing using multiple devices is particularly important, because you want to be sure it works on different screen widths and also different types of devices. And using the Google emulator, so that's another, or any emulator, right? That's in that same idea. So that's the end of the session. Thank you for attending, and keep looking for good talks and attending those talks. And then I'll go and see if there's any questions in the chat.
Hi, Peter. Yes, we have a question from Dominic. Considering the first tip being mobile first, how would be the hover effect in the attrition history be handled in a device with a touch screen?
How would the hover effect in the attrition history be handled in a device with a touch screen? Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, a great question being probably one I can't answer very well. Because I know that there's some technologies that use the history, right, for navigation. Touch screens, you have the swipe, right? You can do, I'm thinking out loud here because I don't know the exact answer. But you have the swipe. You could do right or left swipe.
Sorry.
Yeah. Did you have an idea? I'm just kind of floating around here.
No. Okay. Not at the moment.
Okay. Yes, I'm afraid that question is not one that that I've really considered or thought about. Have to be. I think that's something that we'd have to ask out to the blog, to the forums.
All right.
No, sorry about that.
Any other questions from the audience?
Questions I can answer, maybe.
No, all good. Looks like
Okay.
we don't have any more questions.
Okay.
In
No
that
problem.
case, if you're watching this in a playback of the videos, please feel free to contact Peter to his email or Twitter handle if you have any questions to him. He will be able to respond to you online after you watch the replays. And saying that, thanks so much, Peter, to taking the time to present to us over here in Asia Pac. And please, everyone, take care and be safe.
Okay. Thank you, Francisco. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
You. Have a wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are.
Wherever you are, right.
CloudDB, shaping your new normal.